Hello, it's Phillip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London, and today I'm looking at a book which has come to us from Globe Law and Business. It's one of their special reports. It's a first-class book, and I think very useful book for a law business of any sort, whether it's a firm of solicitors or a chambers, because it's called Pitching for Lawyers. Now, I know that there have been a lot of changes, certainly at the bar, but I think this book will be of use because it'll give us some idea as counsel as to the way things are going, certainly with law firms. The subheading of the book is Using Market Communications Techniques to Improve Your Win Ratio. Now obviously it's much more directed to a firm of solicitors, but I think people like myself will find this very helpful as well. It's been written by Rebecca Harding, and as I say, it comes to us from Globe. Now, Elizabeth and I discussed the book, and she decided to be lead writer, and quite right too, because she's done a very good job in basically getting all the information together. And we discussed the the basis of the special report at the beginning, and she's given it a title, Dread Pitching. It isn't about you, so be kind to yourself and read this latest report from Globe Law and Business. Talk about selling, that's pretty good, isn't it? Well done, Elizabeth. Now let's have a look at this small report. It's not a very big one, there we go, you see that. It's very glossy, so it'll be the light will shine into it a bit. You can see there is law firm management insights as part of that little system. There's nothing in the spine. On the back, you can see a little bit of blurb from about the report itself and what it is. Not a big report at all. On the back inside cover, of course, are other reports from Globe. They are really producing some excellent work at the moment, and I think it's extremely helpful. Now, Sharma O'Neill has mentioned that at the back. She's a managing director. She's mentioned the work at the back, and then you've got details about Rebecca. Again, this is the way the house style at Globe operate, and you can see where she's coming from, and there's a nice email address if you need to contact her. Now it runs to just over 70 pages. There's the front of the report. Then you've got some blurb there, and then you've got the content section, and you see what you've got. You've got some acknowledgements to begin with, an introduction, getting started, how to use the report, where are we now, context, know your competition, approaching a pitch, and so forth. 22 chapters in total, and I do think it's quite interesting. I don't come from a marketing background, but my wife Elizabeth does, so she found this a very interesting book. Introduction, getting started. You probably might think that a lot of this stuff is really, well, I know all about it, no problem, but you don't. That's one of the commonest mistakes I've found. It's always good to have things like these tables to set out. This is common mistakes about what you might and might not do. Now, you may think you know it all, but you don't. And I've learned this over the years as a barrister. Never bluff your way in court. Never think you know it all, because you don't. And this sort of information is extremely helpful because it gives you a technique that you might be able to use. Remember, what we're talking about here is pitching for lawyers, but it is actually, what we're talking about here is actually a technique. And that's really what it's about. So let me just tell you what we think of the book, or rather, in this case, the report. As law firms, as well as barristers' chambers, find themselves in need of acquiring new businesses, or new business rather, the basic principles and processes of how to do this are succinctly encaptured in this new report from Globe Law and Business, which focuses in on the pitching element. Now, I say that because obviously I come from a background as being called to the bar for 30 years. I find it a bit difficult, well, nearly 30 years. I find it a little bit difficult sometimes to understand this pitching concept, because that's not the way the bar was, but it is changing, and obviously nothing like the way it's going to change, in my view, in the future. But we do have to be aware of the way in which people acquire business. We do it in a slightly different way, and it's about names, and it's about people, and it's about reputation as counsel. But I do think it's important to know what is going on, because it's granted that the very word pitch may be anathema to a lot of lawyers who might regard the very idea of pitching as quite beneath them. It's very much marketing after all, if you think about it, that sort of area. This is a rather much of a pity, according to Elizabeth and myself. We say, both of us say that really, because in persuasion, in many of its forms, is an intricate part of advocacy, and we're persuading by way of a pitch. Most lawyers, however, even those with reservations about pitching, will, we think, almost without a doubt, find themselves captivated by what is actually a small publication. It's very easy to read, but it'll give you some ideas. And it takes a refreshingly open-minded, big-hearted and very professional, we think, look at pitching. And I think it's worth doing. And as I said before, you've got to be very careful because we have the ethics, we have the codes of conduct and everything else, but I do think it's worth thinking about. Because on reading this report, you could infer that its key message about pitching is that it isn't about you. It's about your client, or more precisely about your potential client, with whom you'd love to do business. The process, says the author, is about sorting out a whole bunch of problems for your client. What are you trying to do is to give them the information they need to make a decision. And it basically is advice. And that's really what it's about. But I think we've got to be more aware of what's happening because we are, frankly, in a global community today. Things are very different even from the way we did things 15, 20 years ago. Obviously, the financial crisis has changed a lot of things too. So whilst the report takes you through the entire process of pitching, you are reassured by the author that is in every situation, and every client is different, you don't have to follow its recommendations in their entirety. What you can do is you can cherry pick the methods that are obviously relevant and appropriate in order to improve your approach in the hope, presumably, that potential pitfalls can be avoided. And that really is what this is about. It's an advice, it's a report which gives you special advice, basically. Pitching, says the author, is a learning process, adding that it's a long-term activity and investment needs to be made in positive learning and development for the whole team. Now, I said before, but there are a lot of people who probably don't like this, but I think it's the future and it's something we have to recognise because, frankly, we won't survive otherwise. And I say that quite bluntly because I think the business of business is going to change again. And I think that that's something we've got to be aware of. Of course, you must obviously be aware that, as I say, with this long-term activity, because it's a learning process, the long-term activity and investment needs to be made in what is a positive learning and development for the whole team that you have. Of course, you're reminded here that it's not a good idea to blame members of your pitch team if mistakes have been made, because basically that's not the right way to do it at all, implying a positive approach and the encouragement of attitudes will ultimately win the day. And again, that just seems to be common sense. A lot of this is common sense, but it's useful because it's written down. And as I said before, one of the points about this is that people make mistakes. And they don't think possibly about the way they might be doing things. I can remember rather a long time ago now, doing my very first management course and thinking, well, I was a lot younger then. I thought, well, I know quite a lot about management. And it was amazing how much I didn't know and how much I learnt. So I'm always generally very open-minded about how we go about things, because winning at all costs, however, is not the answer. I hear it so often, oh, did you win today? It's not about that, and especially with what I do. It's about achieving what obviously is the most realistic outcome for a set of proceedings. But if you're in the business world, winning obviously is very important, but it isn't the ultimate. Neither, of course, are relentlessly demanding targets, because you've got to have what we use in mediation, which is the reality test throughout. You have to be realistic about it. No one's born knowing how to win new business. Obviously, it's development. You can think about it and adopt a particular strategy. It's a learnt skill, is basically the view coming forward, which is why we who are on the prowl for new businesses are urged, or new business rather, are urged to be kinder to ourselves. Now, the author reminds us We need to be realistic about what is possible in order to increase our chances of winning. And I think that's absolutely fundamental. Apart from being counsel, I also do a lot of mediation. And it is the reality of what is going to hit the parties, especially if they have to go to court and face me in court with the wig and gown on and all the other things that happen, the quaint procedures and all the difficulties, and the fear. It's formal, all these other things. So you see, what you're talking about is you've got to be realistic about what you're really striving to get. So let me conclude by saying, in the final analysis, this report functions as an informed guide to the pitch processes and positive attitudes that really work. As such, it's an ever-present help, I think, certainly for law firms and probably for barristers' chambers. I certainly think it's worth thinking about because of the nature of the way in which we are getting our business today, depending very much on the sort of work you are involved in. It's sensible in terms of information as well as succinct. It's entertaining as well as informative. And I'd like to thank Rebecca very much indeed for producing it, because anybody in the legal profession eager to develop new business, we think would do well to read it. It's not a long book, it's not expensive or anything like that, and it's well worth reading. I keep referring to it as a book, but it's a special report. It was published in 2019. I'm recording this in the autumn of 2019. There's the front of it again. There's the back. Let me just open it in the middle. Relationship building. Here we go. Right in the middle. You see the structure of it. There's no numbering as such. A little bit of numbering, but it's basically giving you pieces of advice and contextual advantages, living with business values and so forth. And then you get on to the next part, which is approaching a pitch. And as I say, I think for people who've never done this before, I think you'll find it really interesting, because pitching for lawyers, when I looked at this, I thought, is that a contradiction in terms? Is it oxymoron? Because if you're a lawyer, you don't pitch, they come to you. Well, things have changed, and that's why this is very helpful. Thank you to Sean, let's get the name, to Nicola, her colleague, and all the other people at Globe. Very grateful for this, and thank you especially to Rebecca for what I think was a very good report. Most grateful. Thank you to all. Bye-bye.